Google, what is the purpose of the ISS? Well, first answer that's suggested by Google. The main purpose of the International Swimming Station is to provide an international laboratory for experiments within the space environment, which, despite all our technological advances, is nearly impossible to replicate here on Earth. In case you haven't known, this thing is supposedly built piece by piece up in space. Piece by piece up in space. That's how it was built. Who's the owner of it? Many countries. The owners of the International Space Station, number one, USA, Russia, the European partner, Japan, and Canada. They are legally responsible for the respective elements they provide, blah, 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 blah. Whatever. Is the ISS in space? Here's the answer. The International Swimming Station is a space station or a habitable artificial satellite in low Earth orbit. Its first component launched into orbit in 1998, and the ISS is now the largest artificial body in orbit and can often be seen with the naked eye from Earth, even though it's miles and miles high. Even though it's pretty much in space, supposedly. What do they do on the International Swimming Station? Crew members conduct spacewalks to construct the International Space Station. Astronauts perform many tasks as they orbit Earth. The space station is designed to be a permanent orbiting research facility. Its major purpose is to perform world-class science and research that only a microgravity environment can provide. What does the International Space Station do, or the International Swimming Station? Well, the International Swimming Station is a large spacecraft or watercraft in orbit around Earth. It serves as a home where crews of astronauts and cosmonauts live. The space station is also a unique science laboratory. Several nations work together to build and use the space station. So far, they haven't even given an example of what kind of experiments they do. Have you ever noticed that? What kind of experiments are they exactly performing, and how is that benefiting the human race? What exactly is the ISS intended to do, other than look good and keep asking for more taxpayers' money? Because whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter if many people think that the ISS belongs to the United States it belongs to NASA, and they think NASA belongs only to America. No, NASA is pretty much, you got a collective body of nations around the world, governments who have come together to be a part of this giant conspiracy. You see, according to heliocentrism, when we pull up this CGI, these fake images of what they lied to us, telling us that this is where we live the entire time, when in fact we don't live in that spinning ball. In order for objects to be in orbit, considering this model, these objects pretty much have to be outside of Earth's atmosphere. In other words, they have to be in space in order to be able to orbit the Earth. Let's do baby steps. When does space begin? Quote unquote space. When does it begin? Well, Google gives us a rough estimate, 100 kilometers. And when we examine the ISS, or the International Swimming Station, it is located at 400 kilometers above the Earth, which means it's now in space. Next step, what is space comprised of? Baby steps. Just to be sure, let's go to Google. First suggestion, what is space made of? Well, space that we can see is mainly very, very empty. If you ignore the galaxies and stars, then the rest of space is mainly a vacuum. So there's no particles at all. The particles that are there are mainly hydrogen and helium, which form a plasma called the intergalactic medium. The key words that I want you to remember out of all of this that we just read is space is mainly vacuum. Vacuum. One more time. Vacuum. Next baby step, what is vacuum? Actually, I got one better for you guys. Let's Google what is a vacuum in space. First answer. Vacuum is space void of matter. The word vacuum stems from the Latin adjective vacus or whatever, however they pronounce it, for vacant or void. An approximation to such vacuum is a region with a gaseous pressure much less than atmospheric pressure. I hope you guys are making notes of this. Now that you understand that a vacuum is simply a system or a condition with pressures much less than atmospheric pressure, then we can go and look at how free expansion really works. The question ultimately is, does free expansion really exist in a vacuum? The answer is very simple. No, free expansion does not exist in a vacuum. Once again, free expansion does not exist in a vacuum. Which then means, if free expansion does not exist in a vacuum, rocket propulsion, how can rocket propulsion work in a vacuum? That's not possible. It simply doesn't work. Why? Because what are you pushing upon? If there's no air for you to push upon, what are you pushing on? Nothing. Which means, what work is being performed by the rocket propulsion? Nothing. No work being performed means you are not going anywhere, which ultimately means interstellar travel does not exist. When these people say that they have satellites that are hundreds of thousands of miles away, that's a bunch of baloney. Any thinking man should be able to look at that and say that's bogus. Why? Because there's no such thing as free expansion in a vacuum. If space, according to what we've been described, what we've been told is a vacuum, there is no way that rocket propulsion works in a vacuum. It doesn't work. Interstellar travel does not exist. The moon landing never happened. It doesn't exist. The mission to Mars, quote unquote mission to Mars, that will never happen. The moon landing was only possible, and we were taken to the moon at the courtesy of Hollywood basement. And that is the exact same thing with Mars. NASA is going to take the human race to Mars at the courtesy of, that's right, Hollywood basement. Now, the ISS, the International Swimming Station, we are told it travels at excessive speeds of 17,000 miles per hour. That's ridiculously fast, especially considering the fact that the speed of sound is roughly 767 miles per hour. That speed alone pales in comparison to how fast the ISS supposedly is traveling. Yet, when we go to look at the ISS, this is 17,000 miles per hour? Huh? That doesn't make sense. What? Maybe I'm wrong. It actually is more than that. It's 17,150 miles per hour. That's the speed of the ISS, but the video doesn't show. That's not 17,000 miles per hour. Maybe our eyes are just playing tricks on us. That to me looks like a school zone. But obviously, that's just too much of a heavy emphasis. Maybe our eyes are just playing tricks on us. Nonetheless, the ISS is said to be at the thermosphere as well. Many of you who have done this study, you know that the thermosphere is a region where temperatures range up to 2,000 degrees Celsius. That is about 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. That is higher than melting points of many earthly elements. Yet, that's what the ISS is composed of, earthly elements. The strongest metal is titanium on Earth. Yet, the strongest metal on Earth, its melting point is 1600 degrees Celsius. That's much less than the temperature of the thermosphere, which means whatever elements you have in the region of the thermosphere, as long as they are not even close to titanium, their melting point is going to be much less. Yet you actually have plastic insulated wires within this International Space Station, and these insulated wires don't seem to melt at all in this hot region, this oven, because last time I checked, the laws of thermodynamics dictates to us that energy flows from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. Where you have a hot region, hot zone, that temperature is going to migrate to the cold zone. And this will happen until you come to an equilibrium. Then it also gets me thinking, because I'm asking the question, how in the world does air conditioning work within this space station? Interesting, is it not? I studied air conditioning. So it deals with expansion of gases. I guess maybe. So is that where then they come up and say cryogenics is what they use? But let's glance over this air conditioning issue and go back to that main point of vacuum. Here is something that all of you need to know. When dealing with pressure differences from one condition to another, especially when you go to the extremes of saying one area is a vacuum yet another area is under high pressure, do you know what that means? If you have two separate conditions, you can't have an open system in which high pressure can exist on one side yet have low pressure, aka vacuum, exist side by side without there being a barrier to divide or to make up for the division of the two. Because do you know what happens? When you have an open system in which you have high pressure on one side and you've got low pressure on the other side, eventually the laws of thermodynamics dictate that your pressures are going to migrate to come to an equilibrium, which means you cannot have an open system in which you have high pressure on one side and you have low pressure / vacuum on another side without there being a barrier or a divider that divides the two and separates them. This ultimately means there is no such thing as you leaving the earth, going high enough, and eventually you break through a barrier like poof, and you pop out of some type of a magical barrier that divides the earth's atmosphere from the unknown regions of space, at which point you magically start to levitate and you begin to float, and woo, magic. There is no such thing as that, because based on the globular model of the round earth presented to us in schools, that's an open system. Think about what we're dealing with here. It's an open system, not a closed system. You see, there is no way possible that we can say we live on a spinning ball such as that which we have been presented with, because it does not make sense according to thermodynamics. Just think about it. It doesn't make sense. If the earth were definitely what we have been presented with, that round ball, it would constantly be losing tremendous amount of energy, unstoppable or unbelievable, at an unbelievable amount of rate. But what I find interesting is the minute you go to Google, let's say, or you search for explanations of the greenhouse gases and you try to look at how solar radiation works, how radiant heating works upon this ball that we've been given, what you always seem to find is an illustration of the atmosphere being depicted as a shield-like structure above the surface of the earth. And that shield-like structure divides the Earth and its atmosphere from the vacuum of space. In other words, you can clearly see a depiction or an illustration of a barrier which supposedly separates the Earth from the vacuum of space. And this shield-like region, known as this atmosphere, that's where you also have the greenhouse gases. And the greenhouse gases, they are the ones that prevent the Earth from losing its energy. Why? Because they keep bouncing up and down, back and forth, so they do not escape to the vacuum of space. But when you examine this, the atmosphere is simply nothing more than air. But this air is not 100% pure. Why? Because you have elements, different gaseous elements. However, it doesn't change the fact that they are simply gaseous gases. That's why it's called the greenhouse gases. How is it that you can have gases, yet these gases can supposedly act as a shield, as a barrier that divides a vacuum from an area of high pressure? No, that doesn't make sense. That can't be the barrier that divides the vacuum of space from the surface of the Earth. It doesn't make sense. Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. Are you understanding what I'm putting down here? I'm just getting you to think about this. These things only make sense when there's an actual barrier above the Earth. The Earth is a closed system, not an open system. It's a closed system. This is the reason why these so-called greenhouse gases, they do work the way they are. It's because we actually have a shield above us. The only thing that makes sense is there has to be a firmament above the Earth, the shield which God placed on the Earth from creation. Bill Nye came and made a statement that is actually in fact true about the real reality of the world. He said the Earth is a closed system. And he continues to say there's no place for us to go. There is nowhere for us to go. We are bound here on Earth. That's what he essentially said, which is true. However, it does not justify the globe. If you really carefully think about it, that statement does not justify the globe. Why? Because the globe is an open system. But it does make sense that there's nowhere for us to go because interstellar travel does not exist, and interstellar travel will never happen. It doesn't exist. There is no mission to Mars. No. There is no Mars One. No. It's only possible at the courtesy of Hollywood basement. Keep your eyes open, ladies and gentlemen. You gotta think. Be open to this. Be open to think about these things. All I'm simply trying to do is just make you think. I'm not forcing you to accept anything. I'm just saying think about these things, because the minute you start thinking about them, it becomes much more clear that things aren't exactly what we have been told they are. This is the Controversy 7, making you think. Feel free to give this video a thumbs up. Feel free to share it. It's just to make you think. But I'm not going to hold you off. I know you got better things to do. So you take care of yourselves, you be safe, and I'll see you guys next time.